Thanks again for joining us for the evening lecture sponsored by a number of people and things going on, but especially the Tippecanoe County Historical Association. And this is the last of the talks that we had put together with them, we being the Archaeology Field School that's co-directed by myself, Corey Cooper. I'm an archaeologist in the Department of Anthropology at Purdue University, and also Dr. Mike Strzeski from University of Southern Indiana, who is here. So we put together a few lectures to add some more content related to the Archaeology Field School. So tonight, I was very excited to have somebody who could talk about their experience over the long term, over several years of working at a French fur trade post. So a site that is in many respects similar to Fort Ouiatenon. So Dr. Michael Nassaney is now Professor Emeritus, congratulations, from Western Michigan University, very recently retired. I also like to acknowledge that he is a fellow Razorback, so go Hogs. But I'm just going to turn it over to him because I think there's a lot to be learned from all of the work that he did for over 20 years at Fort St. Joseph in Niles, Michigan. So please help me welcome Dr. Nassaney.
Great, thank you so much, Corey, and Michael, the Field School, and the Tippecanoe County Historical Association as well for having me this evening. I was actually in this room just about 3 weeks ago, so it's very familiar to be here. And we were talking about French heritage then, and we're going to talk a little bit about French heritage tonight as well, and just how important it is to a lot of people. And there's lots of parallels. I think one of the reasons Corey probably invited me was because of the parallels between Fort Ouiatenon and Fort St. Joseph. I was just telling somebody the other day, in some ways, Fort Ouiatenon is way out ahead of us in some ways. In other ways, Fort St. Joseph is ahead of the project here in some other ways, and so on. But I'm not going to get too much into the history of Fort St. Joseph tonight. I really want to talk about the public archaeology we've been doing. I titled this Some Do's and Don'ts several weeks ago, and Corey asked me for a title. I'll stick pretty close to that, but at least hopefully you'll come away with some of the lessons we've learned from doing the work, some of the challenges we faced as well. So let's see if we can get this moving forward. So some of the talking points here give a little structure to what I'm going to say this evening. First off, I want to talk a little bit about public archaeology so that we're all on the same page with regard to that, because what public archaeology means today is not necessarily what it meant when the term was first coined in the 1970s. And of course, I'll talk about the Fort St. Joseph Archaeological Project because that's the project that I've been involved in that's really allowed me to fully put into practice public archaeology, a collaborative archaeology, a community-based service learning program that the Fort St. Joseph Archaeological Project has become. And as I was just mentioning to Corey and one of the students here, one of his assistants, where we're at today is this thing wasn't, it wasn't birthed fully blown this way 20 years ago. I mean, it started out with small holes and some interest, and each year we sort of added and I like to think everybody wants to be part of a winning team. once we had a little bit of traction and looked like we were doing something interesting, other people wanted to join in, and that's been good. So we've tried to be inclusive in that regard. I'll talk a little bit about how we started to build those collaborations and what those collaborations look like. Just really touch on that. And of course, how we do the work, right? Because that's what it really comes down to. It comes down to doing the work of public archaeology. So we can talk about it, and I do a lot of talking about it, but we also roll up our sleeves and we do the work. Of course, it hasn't all been rosy. I mean, there have been challenges that we have faced. In the beginning, they almost seemed insurmountable, various sorts. I mean, one was the site was underwater, right? So that was not an insignificant challenge. To dewater the site the first year, it cost $10,000 that we didn't have. But we found the support, and again, it was our local partners who were like, okay, you're here, you're archaeologists, you say you can do this, let's go for it. So anyway, that's just one. And then there are other challenges that I'll talk about, because I don't really want to, oftentimes when we talk about getting from point A to point B, people often say, well, we don't have enough money to do it. Well, I don't want to, we don't have to go there. I mean, I'm basically going to assume that if you got a quality product, someone will underwrite it. And if it's worth doing, then someone will prioritize it. So we can keep that sort of part aside. I'm not saying that fundraising isn't important, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about how do you generate the interest so people feel welcomed into the process and they want to contribute in various different ways. And then some of the lessons that we learned, and maybe some of which could be applicable to the work that's being done here. I'll also make the point that every project, because it's embedded in a different community, it's different archaeologists, it's different partners, it's just different than basically, there is no cookbook approach. Right, you have to tailor it to the needs of a particular time, a particular place with various personnel. Okay, so let's get into this. So, public archaeology, the phrase was coined, as I know it, in the 1970s, right, with the book Public Archaeology by Charles McGimsey, fellow Arkansan, at least he was the director of the Arkansas Archaeological Survey. Oh, Andy was the director of the Arkansas Museum. Oh, Andy was chair of the Department of Anthropology at University of Arkansas. So he was like, he held the triple crown at that point. Anyway, the point is that in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, there was lots of legislation being passed that required archaeological sites to be taken into consideration whenever federal dollars are going to be spent. Most of you know that. And that's the kind of public archaeology that McGimsey was talking about, archaeology in the public good, right? Archaeology using public tax dollars. But at the time, the public really didn't get involved, right? They might not even get to see any of the reports that were being produced from the stuff, from the work, because the work resulted in a massive gray literature, as it's referred to. Namely, it hardly saw the light of day, it wasn't in libraries, and so on and so forth. But over the course of the last 30 or 40 years, it became apparent to archaeologists, maybe the public or publics, right? Because there are multiple publics, right? Knew all along that there were other people besides archaeologists who cared about archaeology, right? Archaeologists used to call themselves the stewards of the past, right? They were in charge of the archaeological record. But what about native peoples? What about peoples who live nearby? What about avocational archaeologists? There are all these other groups who cared about archaeology. Even members of the Chamber of Commerce might care about archaeology. I'm sure you'll experience that here, right? Because if doing something at this archaeological site, right, your Fort Ouiatenon, is going to generate interest, is going to bring people in to fill hotel rooms and restaurants. And now you've got the interest of the Chamber of Commerce, right? They're certainly interested in the feast, right? For probably some of those same reasons. So why do these people care about this? Well, I would argue most generally it's because they somehow benefit from archaeology. They all are going to experience very different benefits potentially, right? But I would argue that people are often in it for their own self-interest, right? So if they're not benefiting from it, then unlikely that they're going to participate. But I'll sort of talk about the balances and the compromises I think that come along with it. It's not like it's got to be just, you know, what I want, me, and, you know, for everybody, because then nothing will get done, right? But you can imagine descendants probably want, you know, respect for their ancestors, right? I'm guessing. Avocationalists, they want to be part of the process. They get excited when they find a projectile point, a plowed field, right? So, but they want to be brought along somehow, right? Were they to work with professionals. Locals, I mean, there are places where people avoid plowing archaeological sites or mounds or that sort of thing because they felt a certain reverence for these places, that these were important. They were here before we were here, right? So they care about these places. So they have been stewards of these places. Living history reenactors as well, right? And I'll give you some examples there, and maybe that's an obvious one, so we don't have to get into it. But they certainly benefit, right? Because they want to know what do the buttons look like? The folks who are, right? The folks who are living at Ouiatenon, right? What did they look like exactly, and so on? What were they doing at the site, right, on a daily basis? So one of the questions then is how can they get involved, right, in this public archaeology in an authentic way, in a genuine way, in a truly collaborative way? So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And there's lots of ways that they can get involved. And I'll talk about a collaborative continuum in a minute. So anyway, you should recognize this map, this regional map, because it shows, if nothing else, Fort Ouiatenon and Fort St. Joseph, and some other French settlements from the late 17th and 18th centuries in the Western Great Lakes region. Maybe by the time we get as far south as Fort Ouiatenon, we don't call that the Western Great Lakes region, but had to add that in there anyway. You know, we got involved in a project when folks contacted me and they said, hey, help us find this fort. Like, well, we're archaeologists. That's what we do. We look for stuff that's lost. So we started digging all these shovel test pits, about 350 of them, over just 3 weekends, one fall. Students, some professionals, lots of volunteers. And we didn't find much. We found like a musket ball. This was, you know, what they didn't tell us when they invited us in was that they've been looking for the site for 100 years. They said, oh, come help us. Yeah, okay. Well, on the last day, and you'll see, your Friday is your last day. Maybe for this field season. No, something usually comes up on the last day. So in this case, some guy showed up who'd been using a metal detector in a place where we weren't digging because it was too wet there. And he had a box, and we looked in the box, and it was chock full of gun flints, little bits of French faience, fragments from flintlock muskets. Oh, and these knife blades that were stamped with the names of French cutlers. We're like, yeah, that's the stuff. So he showed us where, you know, he collaborated with us. He showed us where it was. where he found the material, he donated the material, he didn't care about keeping it, and that sort of started us off. So let me give you a brief history. I'm already into the part about how we found it, but so, and I'm not going to dwell again on what we found there, and I really do want to talk more about the public archaeology part. But as you probably have here, MSU, and you're beginning to add to the collection, right? There are hundreds and thousands of artifacts that have been recovered to go along with the documents, right? So this is truly an exercise in historical archaeology, I'm guessing, right? I know for a fact. And so those are the materials that were available to us. That's how we sort of tell the story. This was established as a Jesuit mission in the 1680s, and then the French fort was constructed in 1691, and it became a very important mission, garrison, and trading post for nearly a century. So again, contemporaneous with Fort Ouiatenon, about the same size, although we don't have the outlines of the fort like you do on the ground. But based on the documents, I'll tell you some of the people who were probably there, at least the occupations they filled and so on. English gained control during Pontiac's Rebellion, and basically the garrison was ousted. The British garrison at that point was ousted. It was never occupied, or was never occupied by any British military after that time. French fur traders continued there. And it was abandoned by French fur traders about 1781. So about a decade before your Fort Ouiatenon, I think, was abandoned, if I got my dates right.
Actually, that's pretty close.
Pretty close. Yeah, things were changing right on the frontier at that point. It was a long reach for the British at that point to maintain anything that far inland. They, in the course of being defeated in the revolution and so forth, and they had other matters to deal with at that point. But the site has been commemorated, even though its precise location was forgotten. Right? People wanted to keep the legacy alive. And throughout the 20th century, various institutions tried to locate the fort. Unsuccessfully. I won't get into University of Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame, but then WMU showed up, and so we had the right stuff. So read this caption if you would, please. We don't know what the fort looked like. I just asked some artists to just draw like a French fort. So what I find captivating about this is that once you look at this image, you can't get it out of your head. So we know there was a commandant. There were several commandants. There were about 8 to 10 soldiers. There was a blacksmith. There were several blacksmiths. We found where the blacksmith was working. There was a priest who came and went, and 20 priests over the course of 4 decades or what have you. And they were fur traders, right? And their wives, some were French Canadian, some were Native American. Not that many were actually Native Americans. Some were Métis, not that many really were. And their kids. We know that because we have a baptismal and a marriage register. So it's not complete, but it exists from about 1720 to 1760. So the priest is writing down the names of people he's marrying, the people he's baptizing, and so on. So it's partial, but so 50, 60 people there for, almost 90 years. So when you look at it that way, the question was not, how do you find where the fort was, but how did you hide all of that stuff? Right? Because they generated a lot of stuff. As a matter of fact, before we showed up to do the archaeology, locals had been scouring the fields, collecting artifacts. not only we think from Fort St. Joseph, but from the surrounding area. So again, we've got a scenario somewhat like what you have here, where, I mean, within 2-3 miles of the fort, there's native occupations, and those native occupations have all sorts of 18th century artifacts, I'm guessing, because they're being exchanged for furs and so on. But anyway, let me get the number right. Yeah, it was about 100,000 objects had been collected before we even started doing the archaeology. And we've added to that about 300,000 artifacts. So there's now almost 500,000 artifacts from Fort St. Joseph in the local museum. So some of the ones that the avocationalists, the Miami Cross Society, they call themselves. It's kind of a cool name for like a club or something, right? That's some of what they collected on the right there. So you'll recognize the silver gorget, silver armbands, and those crosses, and various brooches and so forth. Most of that stuff is silver. I mean, they collected other stuff, but I thought you might find that of some interest. Now, you probably could also guess that those are probably not objects that were just thrown away and discarded into middens. We don't know the context of those, but I suspect some of them could be mortuary objects, but we don't know. They were working at the turn of the century, the Miami Cross Society, and in 1913, they and others decided to dedicate this boulder. They found it in a farmer's field a couple miles away, and they had to build this little cart to put it on, not so little, and they brought it across Brandywine Creek. It's estimated to weigh about 70 tons. I think they found the top of it in the field. They didn't know how big it was, and they just kept digging until they unearthed it all. And then these middle schoolers here are used for scale there to give you a sense of how large the boulder is. So for a long time, people in the community of Niles would see that boulder. They'd bring school groups there, and they'd say, "This is Fort St. Joseph." See, it says right on it, Fort St. Joseph. And they thought that was the fort. Well, it was around there somewhere, but they didn't know exactly where. But that was good enough, because they didn't want to go into the woods, bring kids in the woods, I guess. I don't know. So let me tell you a little bit about the collaboration here that we've tried to develop. Let's see, Ferguson and another archaeologist, Caldwell, Chanthafont, did a piece talking about the collaborative continuum. So on the one hand, collaboration is hardly happening at all. It's like the archaeologists might show up to a community group and say, "Oh, let us share with you what we found." And that's the extent of the collaboration. "Oh, and if you want to visit the site, you can come and maybe see us for an hour or something." And that's it. That's one end of the continuum. The other end of the continuum is genuine collaboration. It's archaeology with, for, and by local and descendant peoples. And I take that title from Sonia Adelaide's book, right, on community archaeology. As a matter of fact, in a true collaborative situation, local and descendant peoples are setting the agenda. The archaeologists are just a tool to get the work done. So the research questions, types of sites to investigate, how to approach them, how to do the analysis, where to disseminate the information, how to disseminate the information is all dictated by the partners in the collaboration. Archaeologists, if they're lucky, are but one voice in that collaboration. Radically different than what McGimsey was thinking about when he was thinking of a public archaeology. So archaeology in partnership. So who are the principal partners? Well, I can just speak to the project that I've been a part of, and you can be thinking about the principal partners in thinking the Whistler, is it the Whistler Foundation? I'm thinking probably a principal partner. The TCHA, probably a principal partner. I'm thinking Southern Indiana now is a principal partner, as is, of course, Purdue is a principal partner, and so on and so forth, right? So for us, it started with this little group called Support the Fort. They're a group of mostly reenactors, and they had been putting on some local events, some rendezvous, much smaller scale than the feast, but this was a long time ago. And the feast, it didn't always bring in 50,000 people, right? I mean, at one point, I'm guessing it was smaller. But anyway, they wanted some kind of props for their rendezvous. And so they invited me in to do the work. And, you know, I already gave you the punchline on that. So we ended up finding, but they were, I mean, the site was owned by the city of Niles, and the collection was in the Fort St. Joseph Museum. So those were the key partners initially. And as we were fond of saying, you know, as archaeologists at WMU, we had archaeological expertise, but we didn't have a site. What they had in Niles, they had the site, but they didn't have any archaeological expertise. So it's like, you know, we both could have kind of stood there and just had a standoff there, and nothing would have gotten done. But I mean, obviously, we had something to share with each other. And it wasn't, yeah.
Was Fort St. Joseph Museum, is that excuse me, a municipal or county governmental organization, or is it?
Yeah, City of Niles.
City of Niles.
Yeah. So that's, you know, that's how that started. So how did WMU benefit? Well, I mean, one of the ways, and I can, you know, I'm not going to talk about the benefits for each and every, I'll give you just a few examples here and there. I mean, one of the ways when we began to partner with local people, then all the problems and the challenges and the logistics didn't just fall on the director of the field school anymore. So for example, we commuted 65 miles each way for the first field season. And then we thought, well, we could probably get a lot more done. It'd be 13 hours in the van that we don't have to spend if we lived in Niles. But it's like, how do you find a place for 20 unrelated adults to live in, right? They helped us with that. We found housing, right? I mean, we had to pay a little, but just general logistics. I mentioned to you, like, we need to water the site. And I mean, you know, the university was bringing some of its assets to the project, but they didn't have a cool 10 grand that they could spend on dewatering installation. Oh, by the way, fast forward, we've since found a local who does the installation for us gratis. So, but this is back in the day when we needed to pump the size of a Volkswagen and, you know, diesel fuel and all these other things. And now we're electric, and it's all very, very different now. But, you know, logistics like that, I mean, just, you know, if you need a 2x4, well, I use that as a metaphor, right? For, you know, somebody's brother-in-law's got one, he'll bring it over and he'll give it to you, or just, you know, let you use it or whatever, you know, and so in other words, the locals started seeing this, embracing this project. And any challenge that the archaeologists faced was a challenge that they were facing. So they wanted to be problem solvers. Right? So it didn't just fall on us. That was really critical.
You use a cofferdam, or how do you keep the
just
water?
It's a dewatering system where they install these 1.5-inch PVC well points. And let's say the site was, let's say, about the size of this room. It's a little bit bigger than that. And if the river was here, this landform is only, on most days, 12 inches above the river. So when you dig down 12 inches, you hit the water table. But we'd install those points at about 5-meter intervals all the way around the room, initially like in a horseshoe shape. Connected these well points to this big 8-inch header that lay on the ground. And then that thing was connected to this diesel pump that was capable of removing 800 gallons of water per minute from the ground. Yeah, the dewatering guy says, well, the issue is really not, is this going to be enough? We're afraid it's going to suck all the water out and then the pump's going to run dry and our $100,000 pump is going to be, cashed in. I didn't know anything about dewatering when we started working with them, but the firm is out of Zeeland, Michigan, which is near Holland. So you're guessing there might be some Dutch extraction there. Oh, the name of the company is De Wind Dewatering. So I said, how does this work? And they're looking at me like dumb archaeologist, right? He's obviously not an engineer. They said, we're going to just suck the water out of the ground, pump it out faster than it can come back in. So, well, I don't know. It's like a Dutch firm. They dewater the whole country. I mean, they surely can work on this area the size of this site. So left it to them. We paid them several years to do that. Anyway, another piece was when we were first getting going, we were having trouble getting traction. And so the people in Niles said, we should probably shop this out to some other universities. And they thought it was like Habitat for Humanity, right? I mean, if having like 3 guys with hammers are good, then having 30 guys with hammers is even better yet. So let's just parcel this thing out and have everybody come in and we explained to them it doesn't work that way. And so we said, look, let's enter into this agreement. We'll be here for you. We'll do this work. We're not going to work on anything else. We're going to work on this every year. And at the same time, you're going to commit to us not to try to bring Notre Dame in and other institutions. And so that's our agreement. And we're going to do this work in public interest. And we also established an advisory committee. So this consisted of representatives from WMU, from the city of Niles, and then other constituents. I mean, the trick is just getting people to serve on it. I mean, you probably know it's often not so hard to get people to have their name on the committee, but actually having them to roll their sleeves up and actually do something is another matter. So anyway, but we've had this advisory committee for at least 15 years now. And they meet regularly and they discuss the kinds of things that need to be discussed, namely the direction that the project should move in. And they are in a position where they can make recommendations. It's actually a City of Niles committee, so they can make recommendations to the City of Niles. In the City of Niles, I have to say, is a small municipality of about 10,000 people. I mean, the median income might be, I'm just guesstimating, $32,000 maybe. Unemployment, I don't know about now, but at one point it was like at 15%. And in the 80s, big industry that were in town, we lost all of that. So it characterizes, you've heard the phrase Rust Belt, it characterizes, right, a Rust Belt type community. So they have their own challenges, but they embrace this to the extent that they can. So other partners, we asked the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi to serve on the advisory committee. That's generally been good. But what has happened is, they'd send somebody and, you'd come and you'd make it when you can for a year or two, and then you move on to something else and they appoint somebody else and they appoint somebody else. And so it's kind of a rotating position. And French Canadian Heritage Society of Michigan. So I put this list up so you can kind of think about who around here maybe you might want to involve. I French Canadian Heritage Society of Michigan, bunch of genealogists. They've come up with real dollars before for stuff that we needed. Like we're going to put on a little conference, which we have done in Niles, do a reception, they can come up with $500 for wine and cheese or something like that. You know, every little bit helps, and they're invested then at that point. They're invested in the project. Oh, and at least one of the women is descended from the blacksmith that was at Fort St. Joseph. So she has a direct connection to the site. The Joseph L. Pizer Endowment for the Study of New France. Joseph Pizer was the historian at U of I South Bend, Indian IU South Bend. And he did much of the background research on Fort St. Joseph, translating French language documents and so on in the 1970s and the 1980s. He passed about 10 years ago. His son set up an endowment at the university. So if you're interested in the study of New France, you can apply. It's not restricted to WMU faculty and students. You can apply and you can get funds from the Pizer Endowment. It's on the history department's website. Michigan Humanities Council, you've got an Indiana Humanities Council, I'm sure, tap into them. Society of Colonial Wars in the state of Michigan. This is kind of interesting. I wouldn't say this right directly to the folks themselves. It's a little bizarre. It's people who are descended from people who basically killed Indians in the 18th century. I don't put it that way when I'm talking to them, but they're all descended from somebody who fought in colonial wars. And there aren't many colonial sites in Michigan. There's Fort Michilimackinac, that's the jewel in the crown of historic preservation in the state of Michigan. There's Fort St. Joseph. That's it. All right. Fort Pontchartrain is buried beneath the Renaissance Center in Detroit. So that's it. So they've come on board all sorts of different ways. Underwriting, our publications, supporting lectures, this sorts of thing. Similarly with the Society of the Colonial Dames of America. Some of these are just places too where I've done presentations and so forth. They've been welcoming. The Niles District Library, though, has hosted our summer lecture series. And they open it up to the public. I don't know if this lecture was open to the public. Okay. Well, they advertise it widely. And how many people would we get, Emily, at the Niles District Library for a typical lecture? Yeah, probably about 50 people. Because the public wants to interact with the field school students. They want to find out, where are you from? And what did you find? What was your week like? And and I would typically call them out. And, so that was an important part of it. And I'll tell you some ways maybe you can boost that too. The Kiwanis Club, they're into supporting middle schoolers. We have a summer camp program. I'll talk about that in a minute. So they're like, oh, we want to come out. We want to bring like Subway sandwiches for everybody, all the middle schoolers, all the field school, and anybody else on the site. There's like 40 of us. They're like, no problem. We'll do lunch that day. They come out, then after lunch, we give them a private tour. They've done this every year now for about 7 or 8 years. Conference on Michigan Archaeology, you probably have the equivalent, your professional Indiana. We ask them for a few $100 to underwrite posters or that kind of thing, publicity. It fits with their mission. It just keeps them involved, keeps us on their radar, and so on. It's not a lot of money. It's not about the money. It's about the connection. It's about building relationships, right? And then the Center for French Colonial Studies. I edit their quarterly publication. I'm forever advertising stuff we do in their quarterly publication. We hosted one of their conferences in Niles. It kind of goes back and forth. So, okay, so a little bit about how we do the work. We doing all right for time? I can go another 30 minutes, okay? Or, sure. Okay. So it's, the core of it is the archaeological field school, right? It's the people doing the work like you're doing, right? You're recovering history at the tip of your trowel, right? You're the ones that are doing the work. And that's what, student is doing here, recovering the pipe, and we do this, have this wet screen operation. And of course, note taking is very important. When we were doing the field work in 2001, even before we found the fort site, we were working on the higher ground where we did those shovel test pits and only found a musket ball and a pipe stem. We invited the public in. About, I don't know, 100 people came in that afternoon, and most of them were homeschoolers and parents of homeschoolers. So we're doing dry screening stuff, and we're letting the kids shake the screen and look at pebbles and this sort of thing. They were fascinated by it. The parents were fascinated by it. How can we get our kids involved in this? And so we started summer camps the following year, 2002. We've been doing it now for about 20 years. Middle schoolers, any younger than that, it's a different, it can be done, but it has to be done differently. High schoolers, lifelong learners, educators, we do a week for each, and it's seniors and people of all ages. They're in the classroom in the morning where they learn about the history of the place and archaeology, and they bring their lunches with them. They have lunch with the field school. So the middle schools and high schoolers think that's the greatest thing going, right? I mean, they get to hang out with the university students. And then in the afternoon, they get paired up, they get distributed among the wet screeners, and they're doing whatever the university students are doing. They get rotated through. Emily, you were in the camp program, weren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Emily's one of our success stories, to be sure. So we're very proud of her.
Michael, is Michigan a permit-based system? Do you have to apply for and have a permit from the state?
It is
for
not.
excavations?
It is not. Somewhat surprisingly, since this is a National Register site. So I have mixed feelings about that. We could talk more about that. But this has been tremendously successful. So we've trained upwards of 300 novice archaeologists now, in excess of that. Some come back multiple years. But the other thing we do at the end of the field season is an open house. And again, this started with one of my students who was a reenactor, but doing archaeology. She said in 2004, oh, let me have a couple of my friends come, and like some guy will sleep under a canoe. It's like, oh, okay, sure, that sounds good. And someone will like make a fire and cook something. I said, okay. I mean, I didn't really know much about this. I hadn't been to the feast. I'm not sure I had even been to the gun and knife show there. It was called, yeah. Was it always called the Living History Show, or was it the Gun and Knife Show at one point?
Originally, Kalamazoo Antique Arms Show.
Okay, okay.
Through 2 or 3 iterations.
So, eventually I started frequenting that sort of thing, and I'd learn more. She taught me, and well, 2 years later when we did it, we applied to the Michigan Humanities Council, and we brought in 100 reenactors. So again, it's not the scale of the feast, but no one seen anything quite like that in Niles before. I mean, we had 2,000 people come in over the weekend. As I say, to look at a bunch of rocks in a hole in the ground in a swamp. What the feast doesn't have open excavations. So anyway, I'm just saying. So, this has been great for us. It's an opportunity to bring people who don't know about the site there. As a matter of fact, it was early on, 06 or 06, when a number of the city council members came and saw the archaeology. Okay, I mean, again, it's rocks in a hole in the ground, but they looked around them and they were like, scores and scores of people. And they're like, oh, I guess there's something to this. And at that point, they said, oh, I think you need an advisory committee and so on. So some of the community outreach, right, that we do. So community dinners, right? Lots of folks in town, they want to feed the archaeologists. Now, again, this is all pre-pandemic stuff. You know, it's had to change the last couple of years, but it'll be coming back. But they want to have like 25 strangers to their house to feed them like barbecue, you know, till it comes out of your ears with coolers of beer and, you know, for those that are eligible. And there's something like that every week, right? So that's been great. Our summer lecture series began in 2010. This is an old tradition, right? I mean, archaeologists, when they're in the field, they always want to bring their friends, right? Their fellow archaeologists to the site. And then while they've got them, I mean, the archaeologists want to come because they want to see what's going on. I mean, I'll be out at the site tomorrow to be sure, right? They want to see what's going on. And also they manage to get a lecture out of them usually when they're there. I mean, I was at a field school in the 1980s. I was actually the teaching assistant with at Historic Deerfield, and Jim Dietz stopped by because he had, my mentor at the time had been an undergraduate with Jim Dietz at Brown University. So Jim Dietz came by, hung out for the night, had a few bourbons, had a few more, I think, as well. And so we instituted this. Each year we also have a different theme. So this theme in 2018 was technology. We've looked at the women in New France. We've looked at the Fort St. Joseph River as resource. We've looked at the military, the militia on the eve of revolution, and different themes to kind of mix it up and keep it interesting. And then the speakers would speak to aspects of those themes. And then when I was teaching, I could have one of my classes in advance do research on that theme, and they would produce these informational banners and posters and so forth, and which were also showcased then at the field school. So anyway, videos, happenstance. My son was a scout. We're in the woods getting lost with parents and scouts, and ran into some guy that ended up living in my neighborhood who happened to be the videographer at WMU, who had an interest in history. I told him what I did, and he said, well, we could make some professional videos at pennies on a dollar for you because you're a faculty member. So we can bring, you know, the resources of the university to bear on this. We produced 5 different videos, and you get to see a piece of one in a minute here. And those are all available on YouTube and so on. It's just another way to get our information out there and so forth. Yeah.
Do you ever have any history or pull from the experiences of Campbell and Crow Canyon in creating this public archaeology program?
You know, I knew about those places, but I never participated in those. I did visit Campbell in, I think, 1978. Yeah, Stuart Streever was legendary. You know, he was the master at bringing in people with deep pockets, and they'd lean over the shoulder of David Ash, who's analyzing seeds, and Stu Streever would tell stories about what these seeds are telling about life in the Illinois Valley 2,500 years ago, and get the people interested. And then he'd say, well, what else can we learn? He's like, well, if we had a scanning electron microscope, we could do this and this and this. People with deep pockets, that meant nothing to them. He was the master at that.
Yeah, they started Campbell in the late 70s, I think it was, and then he and Martha, his wife, went on to kind of help found Crow Canyon in Cortez, Colorado.
Even a little earlier than that, because the Coster site was the gem. That was the gem. So, you know, social media, I'm not an expert at that, but, you know, students would say, oh, we really need a and we didn't have all this on day one. They'd say, oh, we really need a Facebook page. That's how we have to communicate. And just like, okay, run with it. Start, set it up, do it, establish it. Whenever students would find something in the field school, I mean anything, initially on day one, if it's a rusty nail, there'd be all sorts of crazy excitement. And they'd be running around the site and everybody would run to the unit. Did you do any of that? Did you do any of that? Yeah. Well, that always bothered me just a little bit. I never wanted to squelch the enthusiasm. I didn't want to squelch the enthusiasm, but I always insisted it's not what you find, it's what you find out. So what we started doing about 5 or 6 years ago is if you found a musket ball, you weren't supposed to just scream it out. I mean, you'd say, okay, Emily, that's way cool. Take that musket ball and show it to everybody else on the site so everybody can see it. Because what we find individually is really, it's a collective find, right? We're a team here, right? And Emily, you now are going to have the opportunity to, starting this evening, instead of doing lab work and washing artifacts, you're going to research musket balls. Now, this is quick and dirty research. This is the kind of research like a journalist would do, right? I mean, you're given like 12 or 24 hours to do this. The next morning, you'd stay in from the field, right? Use online resources, go to the library if necessary, whatever. Collect whatever you could on musket balls and you write your blog. And we would post every single day. If we didn't find anything extraordinary, maybe a new technique is being used or something in the field. Oh, now we're shovel skimming. Okay, someone do a blog on shovel skimming. Right? But each and every day. And so with our dozen of us or so, or 15 students, right, they might blog maybe 2 or 3 times over the course of the field season.
How long is the field school?
7 weeks.
7?
Where we are, yeah. But that's how we use the blog. And we continue it after the field season when we're working in the lab, because people want to know, what's going on with the project. We know you got stuff out of the ground, but now you cleaned it up. And so it can be just an object, a little bit more in-depth analysis, or we pulled samples, we're bringing back soil to the lab. It's like, yeah, we're doing flotation. People don't know what flotation is. Do a blog on flotation. They see us doing it. We've got a short video. You can embed it, all that other stuff. And I mean, the possibilities are endless now. A lot of people want to stay in touch with us in that way. We do email blasts. We used to have an annual newsletter. Now it's a shorter monthly thing. And then I thought I'd show you this little YouTube video here. If you could help me with that, I would much appreciate it. It runs about 7 minutes or so. And it's about what else? Public archaeology at Fort St. Joseph.
Hidden beneath layers of soil and tree roots for more than 2 centuries lay the remains of an important 18th century mission, garrison, and trading post, Fort St. Joseph. During the past decade, Western Michigan University archaeologists, in partnership with community groups, have conducted excavations uncovering evidence of scholarly and public interest. In 2008, a 10-year agreement was signed between Western Michigan University and the city of Niles, Michigan, ensuring continued site investigations, providing exciting opportunities of discovery for students of all ages, and research that involves various stakeholders. Each summer, the public is invited to an open house to view and learn about recent findings. Interacting with the archaeologists and living history reenactors brings the 18th century to life.
The core of our mission of education, and creation of knowledge. This project fits beautifully in that mission. Our students benefit in doing field work, firsthand research, and the excitement of discovery. Our professors, our faculty can use this as their research lab, working with the students and working at various levels in expanding the research horizons. So this is just an exciting opportunity for all concerned.
I'm impressed with how they're going about this, the engagement of students and what they're finding and what they're going to be able to document. It's so easy to think about things that we've lost, structures that we've knocked down, things that we've covered up, history that's been totally forgotten. And this is a fabulous example of finding something that is so historically significant. And then it's so authentic. There's no substitute for the real thing. And the excitement of discovery is just phenomenal.
I start out every year with a little historiography, basically, how history is done. And so this, I think, will be a really good fit into that. How do you try to, put together a picture? And archaeology is one way that you can, get evidence to start to put together a picture of what happened and how people live.
Students need to know that history is not a dead subject. It's an ongoing process of learning and discovery. And I can bring some of my experiences into the classroom and talk about what we are currently finding out, things that we never knew before, even the process of just trying to find before.
It's definitely a lot more interactive. It is like living history. It's really exciting when you get to actually like get down there and start finding things. You're like, this is so old. Wow. It's just a really great feeling to just feel like the time in these pieces. And so, you don't get that from a classroom at all. Just being able to relate what we've been finding has been great. The enthusiasm that people have really rubs off on us, and then we get excited and they see we're excited, and it's a really great chain effect.
Personally, benefit from being involved in the open houses. It's just a different side of archaeology that we don't often get to see in the classroom. Behind me, what's going on? Archaeology is affecting the public. Archaeology is changing how these people feel about themselves and their own history.
We impress it upon our reenactors who come here that they are all a part of bringing the history of this region alive.
It's very exciting, the digging that they're doing here, and it's like putting a puzzle together for us. And the more information they dig up, the more educated we can make ourselves, and the more education we can give to the public. Support the Fort's main goal is education.
Look at this.
When I first started reenacting, I was most interested in the pageantry and seeing great big huge lines of men in colors flying and drums beating and fights playing, and the spectacle of it all was very fun for me. And the main thing that keeps me doing it is interacting with the public and educating the people who are interested in the period. There's so much information about the people who came before us that's buried in the ground over, just a quarter mile or that away. And so much information that we can get about their lives and what they were doing here and why they came here or why they left, and how they interacted with each other that we could learn from. Before the United States took over this region, there were many, many groups of people. This is the Four Flags region. The Spanish were here, the French were here, and of course the Native Americans were here long before any of those people. And they managed to trade together in spite of all of their differences, and they built a community here. And I think we can take a good lesson from that today.
Well, we're at the conclusion of 2 days of our open house now, and it's just been an overwhelming success. We estimate that there were probably over 1,500 people that visited this archaeological site just in these 2 days. The remarks were, again, very positive with regard to the students, their knowledge, their enthusiasm. The audience is also becoming much more informed from the sort of panels that we provide with information and the interpretations of the artifacts and so on, and their interactions with the enactors as well. Is really changing the whole
the whole understanding of what we're doing, and the community is so very receptive.
Today's event is just an exciting part of this whole program. Starting off with everything going on here at the site, from the educational interpretations, the participation with children's programs, and everyone being down here. There's a lot of people from the community, a lot of people from other areas that are here, seeing what's going on here at the fort site, and it's just been incredible. We see this sometime in the future as being a destination point for people interested in the history of Michigan.
The Fort St. Joseph Archaeological Project is made possible through contributions from private individuals and local, state, and federal agencies, and invite your participation in the project to bridge the past and the present, supporting a deeper appreciation for our cultural heritage.
The sky went down to Dolphin City and the sun began to set. Who should I see but the Spanish lady catching a moth and a golden net? When she might be, then she might be.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that gives you a little more flavor of what goes on, at least at the open house. Events like that are, again, they're great events to bring in folks. So the mayor was there, the city council people, the interim provost at the time. The provost has been there on many occasions. President of the university has come down on more than one occasion, and so forth. And these are opportunities to sell this to them. And they, at the same time, they're looking for excitement within the university as well, so they can feather their nest with these kinds of events also. So some of the challenges we faced. This is actually a reproduction of an object that we did find at Fort St. Joseph, a religious medallion. And anyway, the Christ figure is shown on the left, and the Latin inscription is Clarior Sole Miserere. You who are brighter than the sun, have mercy on us. And then that's his mother, the Mary figure on the right, and it says Mater Salvatoris, Mother of the Savior. Support the Fort wanted to reproduce this as a fundraiser. And the director of the museum was reluctant to have that happen. Didn't want it damaged. Felt like the proprietary rights were with the museum and so forth. It took a little while to work that out and so forth. But eventually there was an agreement. It was reproduced. It's been a great fundraiser for us and so forth. There's still copies available. Point is that not all the partners always see things in quite the same way. So some other challenges, right? Is everybody on board? You know, I've been painting a picture that implies that, I mean, what's not to like about archaeology? Immediately across the river, where there was a large Potawatomi village in the 18th century, to this day, there's a very large McMansion constructed there. The fellow who lived there, he's on the high bluff, we're on the low ground, was sort of bothered by the sound of that pump. We ended up shutting it off at night to placate him. Was concerned that if some kind of a reconstruction ever took place there, his view shed would be spoiled. So he sent a letter to the university president saying Nassaney should cease and desist. We're ruining the habitat. We're digging next to a hazardous landfill, which there is a landfill there. We're eradicating, wildlife in the area, and who knows what kind of people reconstruction would actually attract to this location. What element would actually come to this location? So when it goes to the president, I mean, that trickles all the way down. It eventually came to me and I said, look, we're doing this work with, under the auspices of the city, under our partnership and so on. And so, you know, I went back to the president. He said, fine, you know, just move on forward and so forth. But we never really came to terms with that neighbor, right? So there are some reluctant neighbors, right? What, you know, one person's treasure is another person's trash, or the other way around, or one person's historical site development might be someone else's boondoggle. He thought it would be an economic boondoggle. Another issue is, you know, who's being left out? I mean, we advertise widely. Are we really being inclusive? Right? The archaeology we do is extremely white. Right? So there are people of color in the Niles community. We do surveys. People turn them in and we look at demographic profiles and that sort of thing. Native Americans, other people of color maybe constitute 1 or 2%. There's not just a problem with Fort St. Joseph, right? There's the problem with museums in general. But it raises the question is, what is the message, right? What is the messaging that's being put out? I mean, if it was a message that people felt welcome with hearing and wanted to participate in, likely they would show up. So I think we always need to be self-critical, right? And ask ourselves, and something very intentional about the messaging, right? That we're putting out. And you know, some of this is common sense, right? Avoid alienating volunteers, right? They really aren't paid enough to take any grief. I mean, not everyone is treated the same, understandably, right? Some people have been given preferential treatment. They've been invited into the excavations. Others have felt slighted and so forth. So, you know, there are issues there as well that can come back and challenge us, pose problems for us sometime down the road. So some of the lessons that we learned, and I've just got this slide and then one more, and we're done. And again, a lot of this is common sense, but I was just thinking about this earlier while I was waiting for you to come and get me, Corey. It's like, well, you know, it's common sense. I know when I was younger, I wasn't supposed to fight with my sister. But it wasn't easy to not do that. I mean, we often know, right, what's right, but actually putting these things into practice is the hard part. So maintaining some open communication and transparency, I think, is important. We try to air lots of issues within the advisory committee, and also the public is invited to participate in that all as well. So, you know, we try to provide mutual benefits. So at one point we wanted to excavate, you know, we had found evidence of a bunch of structures in an area like the size of this room. And we wanted to expand out and look for evidence of the site boundary. And some of the people on the committee said, no, you should complete work on these structures so we'll know exactly what they look like so we can begin reconstruction. And we wanted to work to define the boundaries. So we said, okay, we'll continue doing what you want us to do. And after a couple of years, we said, well, you know, and here's why we wanted to define the boundaries. So after a couple, 3 years, they said, okay, you know. So you can't always get what you want and when you want it. And you really have to prioritize the goals of the collective. I mean, that's been particularly difficult for me, certainly, right? It's all about me, right? But you have to prioritize the goals of the collective. And I tell students that in the field school, right? Because keep in mind, we were not only working together, we're eating together, communal meals all the time, sleeping in the same place. So it was 5 days a week, 24/5. Right. And so you need to prioritize the goals of the collective, right? Even mean, it's not to say you couldn't have peanut butter or whatever you want, you know, we would make accommodations, but you'd have to think about the greater good, the greater whole. Building relationships of trust, right, is always important. And I think that's something we're able to do with the city. And similarly, we came to trust them, that they had our backs when we needed a place to stay. You know, we had this great accommodation that we paid hardly anything for 5 years. And then it wasn't available anymore. The building got sold. So we're like, what are we going to do? So at the 11th hour, they found an alternative. I mean, we ended up staying in the high school that year. It wasn't as good as, you know, it wasn't as good as the other situation. But then the year after, the new owner had heard that we were great tenants and invited us in. We only had half the size of the space we had before because she and her family were living on the bottom floor, but I won't get into describing this place. Basically, it was a stable, but that doesn't really do it justice. It was great accommodations. We did our lab work there. Anyway, but we had relationships of trust with the community. And I think once those begin to erode, it's really hard to get that back. You know, being humble is a good thing. Trying to be inclusive, respecting diversity. You know, when we're living together, it's easy for factions to form and trying to push up against that, right? So, you know, holding events after hours that include everybody. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to go play cards and, you know, and have a few drinks here, just 4 of us and the rest of you, to heck with yous, right? I mean, they would sort of include, they would, you know, try to be more inclusive. And it's all about compromise, right? Accepting compromise. And I think that goes with that certainly parallels some of these other points that I made. And trying to be proactive, right? Identifying and rectifying imbalances really before they upset the process, right? Basically nipping something in the bud, dealing with something when it's a molehill before it gets to be a mountain. And having open discussions, right? Certainly with I mean, in a lot of ways, the field crew was a microcosm of the larger project as well. So, you know, the nice thing was also I hand selected all of the field school students that I worked with. This was not a required class. It was by application. And frankly, if a student hadn't taken a class with me or if they didn't come highly recommended, I mean, if I had any doubts, because the relationship with the community could be so tenuous that, you know, one bad apple could really spoil things. You know, anyway. Okay, so just a couple things I was mulling over when I was coming to conclusion of this and thinking about you all. So I'd ask you to think about, what are your next steps? I don't know, maybe that's just a rhetorical question at this point. If time permitted, I would love to hear more about what are your next steps, right? I always tell students, and I would tell anybody in a relationship, we're at point A and we want to get to point B. You know, we're at point A and we want to get to point B. How do we do that, right? How do we do that? Are you building a public archaeology program or expanding on a public archaeology program? Then if so, I think you'll have to tailor it right to your needs and your circumstances. But maybe you can benefit from some of the lessons that were learned at Fort St. Joseph. Good luck. Thanks for your interest. Any questions or comments? I hope that was helpful. Yes. Tell me who you are.
My name's Joseph Bartlett. I'm
Joseph,
a member
great.
of DCHA and been fascinated with Ouiatenon since I was probably 18 or 19 years old. Who owns Fort St. Joseph?
The city of Niles.
Okay, so it's municipal property, all right.
Yeah, so, it's good that the city of Niles owns it. And it's not so good that the city of Niles owns it, I would say. And again, I don't tell them that, I don't necessarily say that. So for example, let me just be quick about it. It's great that they own it because it's protected. I mean, there is an ordinance. You can't go on city property and dig randomly and, that sort of thing. The flip side of it, they've been reticent to apply for national landmark status. I don't know how interested they are in really raising the visibility of this place, because I think the concern is they will lose local control. I mean, I think the place could be eligible for who knows what. For example, Michilimackinac is part of the Mackinac State Historic Park system. I think this could become part of that state park system. But then it would be run by the state and it wouldn't be run by the municipality. So anyway, that's just my opinion. So yeah, owned by the city. Yeah, Michael.
I was just wondering how you deal with the issue, like, you talk about involving the community and that sort of thing. How you would deal with the issue, you have somebody, oh, I want to come out for a day, or I want to come out for 2 days, or I want to come out for a week, and they don't know anything about archaeology or how to dig or anything like that. And you want to help get people interested, but at the same time, you have an excavation to run and you don't have time to train people for 1 day or 2 days and that sort of thing.
So we channel them through the camp program.
Yeah.
So one of my former students, I mean, he's 15 years post MA now. He's been teaching part-time at the university forever, for 15 years. He's a very good teacher. And this guy is great with 9-year-olds up to 80-year-olds. He's good. He's good with them. He meets them in the classroom and he does the, history of the fort. And this is what archaeology is about. And then we usually, for the middle schoolers, we'll send a van, right, a couple vans over to get them, because they're entrusted to us for the day. We bring them back from the library. It's a mile away or whatever. But similarly with like retirees and others, they probably fit more of the profile, I would think, that you're maybe thinking about. We charge for that program. It basically pays his salary. I think it's $150 a week. People who live in Niles, they generally go for free because someone has underwritten that. So, and then, we can control the situation a little bit more. I say that in a positive training way, where we teach them it's not what you find. This isn't a treasure hunt. It's what you find out. When people see, and I'm sure, I know you know this, when they see those really straight cut walls and the flat floors, and when they see people troweling, a half of a centimeter at a time, they gain a different appreciation for the process. And I think they're less likely to show up on the weekend with a shovel and, to find stuff. And so that's part of that training, I think.
I think most members of the public have a very different idea of what the whole process is all about, just finding goodies and that sort of thing, as opposed to, meticulous digging and that sort of thing.
Well, and this is why too, at the open house, when you can go a little bit more in depth when you're talking to them, when they see an object and you can say, look, this is what we learned from this object about history. Then that, I'm not saying it's going to convert the most diehard, artifact collector. But that's one of the ways we've done it. And we've had some people that we know probably were just interested in that aspect of it. But when they're with us on site, then they have to do it our way. So.
Yeah, part of our problem is that the excavations and investigations are sort of intermittent. it's not every year sort of thing, we were in there in 2009 and 2012, 13, and then 16, and then.
Well, and that,
22. So, yeah, it's harder to get a, big organized program there as far as the public is concerned.
in 2014, I was on sabbatical. So I took that year, I was writing the book on the archaeology of the North American fur trade, and I told them this summer, no field school. They were appalled. They couldn't believe it at first. And I said, look, you folks should know this. This is the advisory committee. It's not just about digging. We've got to catch up, and we're writing this stuff up. This is important. I said, what we're going to do in lieu of that, though, is we're going to have a conference. Actually, I think you were at that
2011.
yeah, at the 20, well, this was another event that we did in 2014. It was the year I was on sabbatical that fall. And we asked the question, how do we move forward?
That was the impact that year, right?
Yeah, we asked the question, how do we move forward? There were 70 people there, and it wasn't the same for them, but yeah, you're right. The part about it being intermittent could certainly be a challenge. Yeah.
Well, a couple of questions. It's kind of a coin with two sides again. The amount of support that you get from state and local government, is that significant? And is there an equivalent in Michigan of the Department of Natural Resources that you are working with?
We haven't worked with the Department of Natural Resources. The support we get from the city and the state, it's not big chunks of money. Basically, we run the program on a shoestring. Students pay tuition. The city does throw in like $2,500 for the open house event. I usually apply to Pizer Foundation for small bits of money and so forth. The camp pays for itself. Students are paying tuition for that. So it's kind of a break-even thing.
Do you think that the fact that the site is owned by a governmental municipality has any negative effect on your fundraising through grants?
No, I don't think so. At the national level, it's tremendously competitive. We applied a couple times to the National Endowment for the Humanities. We went to Washington, we met with people there, and they said, well, the significance of this site has to be such that it is, and of your work has to be such that we're reconceptualizing the national patrimony. That's the way they put it. But they were funding stuff. Yeah, but they were funding stuff in Virginia and, within the Beltway and so on. I don't know, on the other hand, a couple of my colleagues applying to NSF, Michelle and Jackie Yang, they said six times they reapplied till finally they broke through. So I didn't have that kind of persistence. After a couple of times I said, we're just going to do it this way. But that was just me. I think if someone else comes in, I think they'll probably do it differently. All right, students, I'll give you a minute to collect your thoughts. Okay.
So I got two main takeaways.
Okay.
Next time around, it's okay to have students sleep in a stable or perhaps barn. And
I've got a barn.
perfect. And number two, they should be working harder and washing artifacts at night. Those are my two main takeaways.
So we did lab work in the evenings. Yeah, pretty rigorous day, Emily. Yeah.
But I mean, all that is sort of part of the different living situation and the logistics and everything. So, yeah.
You have a captive audience.
So yeah, lab was, again, I don't know. It's not to say, see young people, so they could do things into the wee wee hours of the evening, I'm sure, and still get up and try to keep straight floors and straight walls. But yes, breakfast was out at 7. You know, someone was in charge of that. 2 people were in charge of that. Then at 7:45, it all got put away and we got in the vans at 8. And then lunch was made. We used to make it in the morning, then they started making it in the evening. Had like a big checklist there. You could write what you wanted, on what bread, and how much jelly, and you know, your sandwiches were all made for you. Everybody ate really well. But they were paying about $15 a week for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Yeah. So, and then Wednesday evenings was the lecture. So then we come back. We used communal showers at the Y. We're able to go to the Y. And there was a brand new facility there. So that was great because we could get in 10, 12 people in and out in 15, 20 minutes.
They were allowed to shower every night. What a waste. Opulence. Opulence.
Yep. River, right. Yep. And so then dinner was 6 sharp. You know, 2 people would go back early, like 3:30. They'd get showered at the house. There were showers at the house with only 2 bathrooms there, so they get showered up, and then they start dinner. And dinner was at 6 sharp, and 7 o'clock we'd start in on lab. Wednesday was a lecture, so Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday we did lab, and then usually Friday we would cut out for the weekend.
I mean, that's more like a lot of my field experience in Alaska, where you're in a place where you're just there. And so all you're doing is archaeology and then the normal day stuff and until you leave that place, right? And so everybody is there doing that until it's done, it's over.
Well, it creates a kind of, well, there's some peer pressure. There's some camaraderie. There's a healthy competition, I think, that often emerges. Like, you know, someone put on a really great dinner and then, you know, someone said, oh, my grandmother's fried chicken, I'm getting that recipe. And he's soaking this thing in buttermilk overnight and this. I mean, just raise the bar on that. That was all really healthy competition, I think, to me.
I was a product of the Crow Canyon program in the mid-80s.
Okay.
And that's the way it was run there. It is a captive experience. You are doing stuff from sun up to sundown, somehow related to archaeology.
Sure. So students, whom among you are going on to become archaeologists? Oh, several. Okay. So what's your next step there? You just raised your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, so I graduated from Purdue a couple of weeks ago from the AMP program and also major in classics, but I'm going to be doing some CRM archaeology down in Florida, probably but our CRM in general, probably for another like 2 years or so. Yeah, and hopefully a master's or PhD.
Good for you. Well, that's the route I took. I ended up, you know, after I had my BA, I worked in the field for a couple of years, and you know, I mean, even the field school usually will give you a flavor for what it's about. Others of you, who else is going to Miami? Anybody?
They're all going to Miami, they just don't know it yet.
Well, usually our students coming out of the field school, usually a number of them were interested in where the work was at that point. Our field school had a pretty good reputation. If I recommended folks, they usually did pretty well. So, who among you is from Southern Indiana? Okay, 4 of you. Okay. Gotcha.
I told them they should recognize you because I show your film in my intro class.
In search of Fort St. Joseph?
Yes, I have a
nice.
I have a DVD copy of it. Yeah,
I think I got one of those.
Michael, thank you. This is really inspiring. Going back to my experience with Crow Canyon, I have for decades always kind of had a pipe dream that Ouiatenon could be something like that, but there's a lot of moving pieces, but maybe someday.
Well, like I say, we did it on a shoestring, but it's because we had a lot of help from a lot of people. We also did like a booklet series, and here, let me leave these. I don't know if you have a field school library or something. You have a place where you have resources?
Go to the fixed house eventually. We can pass
Resources
them
to
around.